If you're reading this, I apologize in advance. I'm sorry this is so long, but I've been carrying a lot on my shoulders for a long time. I trust all of you here, and I feel like I need to share my story. You don't have to believe me. I'm sure most of you won't, but I just need to get it off my chest so I don't take this secret to my grave. So, here it goes. For years, my two closest friends, Logan and Joel, and I had a ridiculous tradition. Whenever one of us had a birthday, the birthday boy would get pranked. Let me give you some background about my friends. Joel was the skinny kid who seemed to stay underweight no matter how much junk food he ate. His wardrobe was simple: t-shirts and jeans, maybe a hoodie if it was cold, or shorts if it was warm. His shaggy blonde hair often fell over his face, and he couldn't grow facial hair no matter how hard he tried. Joel was naive in an endearing way. Logan, on the other hand, was the outgoing one. He was athletic and at least a foot taller than Joel and me. He had buzzed black hair, thick eyebrows, and came from a family with Mediterranean roots. Logan had a natural talent for talking his way out of almost any situation. He had this amazing ability to calm people down, which he always said was thanks to his award-winning smile. And me? You can call me Edward. Our tradition started when we were in high school in the late 90s. Joel and I decided to pull a prank on Logan for his July birthday. We showed up at his house early in the morning, trying not to laugh as we set things up. Just to name a few highlights: we covered his toilet seat with plastic wrap, filled his shower head with red Kool-Aid powder, and swapped his face soap with school glue. Let's just say Logan had a rough morning. Of course, he swore revenge. Since my birthday was next, in mid-October, I braced myself for payback. At first, I thought I dodged a bullet because my birthday passed uneventfully. But the prank didn't come until Halloween night. That evening, I was out trick-or-treating with my little cousin, who was dressed as a Secret Service agent, complete with a black suit, aviator sunglasses, and a toy earpiece. He even had a plastic pistol in a holster. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. Chasing a 9-year-old around all night and keeping him safe was way more tiring than I'd expected. I dragged myself to my room, ready to collapse into bed, but as soon as I opened the door, a deafening siren blared from inside. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in, and adrenaline flooded my system. Disoriented, I clawed at the wall and spun around, only to slam my shoulder into the door frame. When I finally realized what was happening, I saw an air horn duct taped to the wall behind the door, perfectly positioned to go off when the door opened. Of course, I immediately knew who was responsible: Joel. When his birthday rolled around in January, Logan and I teamed up. We invited Joel over for a night of StarCraft, pizza, and junk food. I pretended I couldn't make it, but while they were hanging out, I snuck into Joel's house and kidnapped his 2-year-old Lhasa Apso, Rocco. The next day, Joel showed up at school thinking his dog had run away. He was devastated. We only let him believe it for a day before confessing, but he didn't speak to us for a week. And so, this prank tradition continued for years. Until one time, when it all went horribly wrong. By the time we were in our mid-20s, Logan and I hadn't seen each other in years. We ran into each other at a party, and after catching up, we started reminiscing about our old pranks. Before long, we came up with a plan to prank Joel. The first step was to invite him to Logan's grandfather's cabin for a weekend. The cabin was in the woods near a lake, about 3 hours from town. Naturally, Joel suspected we were up to something. He called us out, but somehow we managed to convince him we were too grown up for pranks. The trip started off great. We spent the first night drinking, joking around, and sharing ghost stories around the campfire behind the cabin. On the second night, after we were all a bit tipsy, Logan suggested we take his grandfather's boat out on the lake to fish. Catch them while they're asleep, he joked. We'd fished at that lake countless times over the years, so it felt nostalgic. It wasn't too cold yet. The lake wasn't frozen, but our breath came out in frosty puffs. We paddled out to the middle of the lake and clumsily fumbled with the old tackle box, trying to bait hooks. Suddenly, Logan yelled, "Hey, watch it!" He grabbed his hand, and I noticed blood dripping from his fingers. "You hooked me, jackass!" he snapped. "You did that to yourself, idiot!" I fired back. Logan stood up in the boat and shoved me, forcing me to sit back down. Within moments, we were wrestling on the floor of the small fiberglass boat. "Stop it! You're going to tip the boat!" Joel yelled. I let go, and Logan stood up, yelling something at me. But as he did, he lost his balance and fell backward into the dark water. He didn't resurface. "Holy!" Joel screamed, shining his headlamp over the water. We both panicked, scanning the lake with our flashlights, but the water was too murky. All we saw were bubbles, then nothing. Joel turned to me, his face pale and eyes wide. "What the hell, man?" he said, his voice shaking. He was crying now. Lan's a good swimmer, I thought. But this doesn't make sense. Joel slumped back into the boat, cradling his face in his hands. I leaned over the boat's edge again, shining my light into the water. Logan was nowhere to be seen. Of course, I knew Logan could swim. He was more than just good. He was an exceptional swimmer. Every summer growing up, he spent time at the lake. He was so skilled that Joel didn't realize Logan had probably swum under the boat toward Fidget's bar, a small island near the center of the lake. Officially, the island was called Box Island. But years ago, Logan's grandfather named it after his Australian shepherd, Fidget. The name stuck, and we always called it Fidget's Bar. The island was only about 100 feet from where our boat was floating, so I had no doubt the swim would be easy for Logan. Joel turned back to me, his face full of desperation. "Do something. Why aren't we doing something?" His words made me think about high school. The time we played a prank on Joel and made him believe his dog had run away. The guilt I felt back then crept up now. A reminder that maybe this joke had gone too far. Joel's face was a mess. His eyes swollen and red. His nose running. His hands shaking. "Let's head to Fidget's bar and figure this out," I shouted to Joel. Grabbing the oars, I began paddling toward the island. Joel clung anxiously to the front of the boat. When we reached the island, the boat scraped onto the shore. Joel jumped out immediately, pulling the boat in hard, which made me lose my balance and fall backward. I didn't say anything as I climbed out. Joel was already stripping off his clothes. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm going in after him," he snapped, pulling his shirt off. "Joel, wait," I started. But he wasn't listening. He waded into the icy water until it reached his chest. "Joel, it was a prank. Logan's on the island," I shouted after him. The word prank made Joel freeze. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. For a long moment, he just stood there, unmoving. The wind picked up, icy and sharp, and whipped across the lake. Behind me, the trees swayed violently in the gusts. I glanced up at the moon for just a second. That's when the hit came. Joel's fist connected with my nose so hard that I heard a crack. For a moment, I heard nothing but ringing in my ears as I fell to the ground. When I looked up, Joel was pacing along the rocky shore, shirtless and soaked, wearing only wet boxers. His ribs stood out as he took deep breaths. I didn't say anything. I just gathered his clothes and handed them back to him. Joel grabbed them without a word and got dressed. I sat down and lit a cigarette. My face was still hot, and when I touched my nose, my hand came back bloody. Joel broke the silence. "Where's Logan now?" I pointed my thumb behind me toward the dense trees. "I don't know. He should be somewhere on the island." Joel and I stood side by side, staring into the dark woods. The wind had stopped, leaving the island eerily silent. I realized I'd never actually explored Fidget's bar before, and I was pretty sure Joel hadn't either. Logan used to tell stories about blazing trails here with his grandfather, but that was years ago. Now, as we stood at the edge of the trees, one unsettling fact remained. Logan hadn't shown himself. Joel inhaled sharply, flipped on his headlamp, and stepped into the woods. The beam of light pierced the darkness as I followed with my flashlight. Joel moved cautiously, sweeping the light back and forth. We found what looked like a trail leading deeper into the forest. Up ahead, there seemed to be a clearing. Together, we stepped further into the unknown. I just wanted to find my friend and get off the island. I wasn't even mad about the punch. I probably deserved it. Mostly, I was in shock over everything that had happened and overwhelmed with regret for going along with the prank. Something about the situation felt off. We hadn't planned for Logan to hide out on the island like this. By now, we should have seen him. The original plan was simple: regroup on the island, have Logan jump out and scare Joel, and call it a night. We'd laugh it off, head back to the cabin, and enjoy the rest of the evening. But things had gone horribly wrong. Deep in my gut, I felt something was wrong, a feeling I couldn't ignore. As we walked toward the clearing, we spotted a well. It was old and made of stone, with a wooden pulley and a rusted crank above it. Ferns and vines had overgrown its base, climbing up the wooden frame. There was no rope or bucket inside. Beyond the well, almost swallowed by the forest, was a small shack hidden in the underbrush. It was unnervingly quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, no sound at all. For a moment, I thought maybe my ears were still ringing from Joel's punch. Then finally, there was a noise, a voice. It was faint at first, but gradually became clearer. "Logan?" I recognized the voice, and relief washed over me. But something was strange. His voice sounded distant, almost like it was echoing. Joel and I ran toward the sound, which seemed to be coming from inside the shack. The shack looked like it had been abandoned for decades. It wasn't much bigger than a garage. Most of the windows were cracked or covered by branches. The unpainted siding was rotting, and the roof had partially collapsed. The door, once green, was now warped and falling apart. Joel pushed the door, and it crumbled inward. Inside, we found an upside-down table, broken chairs, and rusted utensils scattered across the floor. A stack of old newspapers, tied with string, reached the ceiling in one corner. The place reeked of mildew. Then we heard Logan's voice again. But this time, it didn't sound like it was coming from inside the shack. It was coming from below. Joel and I glanced at each other before frantically searching the floor for some kind of trapdoor or hatch. I kicked over the stack of newspapers, but there was nothing underneath. Joel tossed aside the broken chairs, but it was no use. The floor was damp and covered with an old rotting rug. I dropped to my knees, trying to find a seam or edge to pull it up, but it wouldn't budge. Finally, we gave up and stepped outside. That's when it hit me. The well. Joel and I rushed over to the ancient stone well and leaned over the edge. Joel's headlamp illuminated the shaft, but the bottom remained shrouded in darkness. "Logan, are you down there?" I shouted. "Hey, you guys made it!" Logan's voice echoed up from the well. Joel looked at me, confused. "What are you doing down there?" he called out. There was a long pause before Logan responded. "Hey Ed, remember when you made Joel think his dog ran away?" Joel and I exchanged uneasy glances. "Yeah, I remember," Joel muttered. "Right here, man," Logan's voice replied. "It's so cold down here." "Logan, how do we get you out?" Joel shouted. "You guys should come down here," Logan said. His voice had an odd, almost sing-song tone. "It's delightfully cold." Joel and I froze. Something about his voice chilled me to the bone. Joel whispered, "What is he talking about?" I didn't answer. Instead, I yelled back, "Logan, is there another way down there?" There was a long silence. Then Logan's voice echoed up again. "You should come down here, Ed. It's such a beautiful day." That was the last time I ever heard Logan's voice. Joel and I shouted for him for nearly an hour before giving up and heading back to the cabin to call the police. For the next week, search teams scoured Fidget's bar and the surrounding lake. They searched every inch of the island and dredged the lake for days. Finally, 9 days after the search began, they found him. Logan's body was discovered in the lake, about 80 yards from the shore of Fidget's bar. The police said his neck had been broken when he hit his head on a submerged rock after falling from the boat. They assured us his death had been instant. He never even took another breath. But if Logan died the moment he hit the water, who had we spoken to on the island? Whose voice had we heard in the forest and the well? I don't expect you to believe me. I can barely believe it myself. But at least now the story's out there. You can decide for yourself what to believe.